All right, let's dive right into this explainer. We're looking at the absolutely high-stakes dual hero's journey behind the invention of the very first practical automobile. This isn't just some dusty history about gears, metal, and combustion. It's really a story about sheer human ingenuity. It's about totally defying the status quo and that relentless drive to completely reshape how we move across the planet. To really grasp the massive magnitude of this invention, I want you to picture the world in the 1880s. Imagine these quiet and, yeah, probably pretty manure-scented streets of a 19th century city. The absolute loudest thing you'd hear with the clip-clop of horse hoofs. I mean, there were no highways, no drive-thrus, and literally zero gas stations. People relied entirely on animals to get around. So think about the huge leap of faith it took to look at that world and say, I'm going to build a machine that changes human mobility forever, and I'm going to convince everyone to just ditch their horses. It sounds kind of crazy, right? So let's get into section 1, the first practical automobile. Enter Carl Benz. Carl Benz was this visionary German engineer who dared to dream up a completely mechanical replacement for the horse. And he didn't just want to make some quirky novelty item. No, he wanted to create a practical, reliable machine that could take you from point A to point B without needing a bale of hay. To really get his vision, we have to look at the reality of 1884. Transportation back then meant traditional horses. They needed rest, they needed feeding, their range was incredibly limited, and let's be honest, they had a mind of their own. But Benz's vision for 1885, that was a fast, tireless, engine-powered future. A machine that could run as long as it had fuel, offering just an unprecedented level of freedom and independence. The genesis of the motor wagon is anchored in a really tight little window of history. So in 1885, the vehicle was actually built in Mannheim, Germany. Benz worked in total secret, testing his creation out in the courtyard of his factory. Then, in 1886, he filed the official patent, which we pretty much consider the birth certificate of the automobile today. And finally, in 1888, we get the defining moment, Bertha Benz's historic drive, which literally proved to the entire world that this thing actually worked. Moving on, Section 2, Engineering the Motor Wagen. Let's look at the mechanical ingenuity here. So how do you actually build something that has literally never existed before? Carl Benz had to methodically plan and design everything from absolute scratch. Remember, there were no auto parts stores in 1885. You couldn't just run out and buy a steering wheel or order a carburetor online. Benz engineered the very first lightweight, high-speed, single-cylinder, four-stroke gasoline engine. He had to invent a rack and pinion steering system for an early three-wheeled setup, mainly because he wasn't satisfied with how four-wheeled steering worked at the time. He even custom-designed the spoked wheels, completely moving away from heavy wooden carriage wheels to something light and durable, basically borrowing inspiration from bicycles. And the magic of how it all worked breaks down into 3 remarkably simple steps. First up, gasoline, which, fun fact, was actually sold as a cleaning solvent in pharmacies back then, fuels the engine. Second, a spark ignites that fuel and the resulting combustion generates power by pushing a piston. Third, that mechanical power is transferred through a series of belts and chains to drive the rear wheels. Boom, you've got forward momentum. The blueprint for almost every single internal combustion engine vehicle that followed for the next century was laid out right here. Now for Section 3, Overcoming Early Roadblocks, and specifically, Facing Public Fear. Because having a working machine was really only half the battle. Carl Benz faced massive social roadblocks once this thing was actually built. The public reaction? It wasn't awe, it was outright terror. People were genuinely terrified. I mean, imagine seeing a hunk of metal hurling itself down the street with no horse pulling it, popping and banging, just belching out gray smoke. It was this noisy, explosive contraption that violently disrupted their quiet, predictable lives. Some folks literally thought it was black magic. Others just thought it was a dangerous, useless toy that was going to frighten the livestock. So Carl Benz, this brilliant engineer, was actually getting really discouraged because he just couldn't get the public to see the value in what he'd created. Which brings us to Section 4. Bertha Benz's historic drive, the ultimate road trip. So Bertha was Carl's wife, and she was also his business partner. She had actually financed his work, and she understood something that Carl, being the perfectionist engineer, completely missed. Engineering alone wasn't going to win over the court of public opinion. You had to put on a show. The car desperately needed a champion, and Bertha Benz became its very first test driver. Without telling her husband, who, by the way, was still endlessly tinkering in the shop seeking absolute perfection, she packed up her 2 teenage sons one early August morning in 1888 and just took the car. She embarked on a famous 65-mile long-distance drive from Mannheim to Pforzheim to visit her mother. Her one mission? To prove the absolute, undeniable practicality of her husband's invention. This was the ultimate road trip, but we're talking about the most brutal conditions imaginable. Remember, no gas stations, no mechanics, no paved highways. The roads were basically just rutted wagon trails. When she ran out of fuel, she had to stop at a local pharmacy to buy Ligroin, a solvent, effectively making a small-town apothecary the world's very first gas station. When a fuel line got clogged, she literally used her hat pin to clear it. When an ignition wire shorted out, she used her garter as an insulator. And when the wooden brakes started to wear down, she asked a local shoemaker to nail leather onto them, casually inventing the world's first brake pads. I mean, talk about MacGyver-esque ingenuity, right? She fixed the car on the fly, absolutely conquered this historic road trip, and proved to the entire world once and for all that the automobile was viable. And that leads us to Section 5, the legacy of the gear. Let's look at the lasting impact. 1886. This was the exact year Carl Benz secured the official patent for his motor wagon. And in the grand timeline of human history, 1886 is absolutely the definitive starting line for the modern automobile industry. Before this year, humans completely relied on muscles and wind. After this year, we harnessed the power of the engine. To really wrap up the historical magnitude of what we've just covered, consider this whole sequence of events. We are talking about the very first practical automobile, invented by Carl Benz and built entirely in Mannheim, Germany. It pioneered the gasoline-powered engine for mobility. It faced down and totally conquered intense public fear. Its utility was proven not in some controlled lab, but out on dirt roads by Bertha's fearless drive. It birthed the modern auto industry that employs millions of people today. And fundamentally, it transformed global transportation forever. Literally, every single car you see outside your window today traces its lineage back to this exact machine. Which brings us to our final thought for today. Carl and Bertha Benz completely changed how humanity moves by daring to replace the horse with a machine. They faced a world that literally couldn't imagine an alternative to what they already knew. Today, as we look at our own crowded highways, emissions, and the huge rise of electric and autonomous vehicles, we kind of find ourselves at another crossroads. So what will drive our next revolution? Well, whatever it is, you can be sure it's going to require the exact same blend of visionary engineering and fearless championing that gave birth to the very first car. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and hey, keep questioning the world around you.